Since all moments of physical time are intrinsically present, it might seem that real existence was not changeful at all, but only perhaps asymmetrical, like a frieze of sculptured arrows all pointing one way, or a file of halted soldiers lifting one foot forever, as if they had meant to march. The illusion of successive events would be produced by the eye glancing along the frieze or the reviewing officer passing down the line. This ancient persuasion is founded on much moral reflection and is appropriate to the intellect composing and recomposing its views of the truth. The realm of truth is indeed eternal and static, and the exploring spirit may traverse it by one or another narrow path in 1,000 directions without adding, moving, or changing a single feature of that indestructible labyrinth. But in regard to the realm of existence, this suggestion is inapplicable and radically perverse. Indeed, even on this hypothesis, flux would not be abolished, but only transferred from the panorama of facts to the living spirit, which, in gradually discovering them, would be really passing through a succession of different states. All the questions concerning change, time, and existence would recur in respect to this experience and its temporal order, and the dignity of that eternal truth, arrogating to itself the name of reality, would not help at all to explain our passing illusions, and in comparison with their insistence might itself seem rather shadowy and unimportant. Moreover, whence should reviewing officers or traveling eyes fetch their mobility, save from that very world which this hypothesis declares to be static? The gift of progressive observation is no homeless miracle, no illusion without a ground. It is a faculty native and appropriate to animals. It is quite true that often a movement of attention produces an experience of change before an object, like an inscription, which is materially static. But then it is not a disembodied spirit that freely surveys that monument and notes its parts seriatim. An instinctive or trained movement of the eye imposes a temporal order on the words read. Only haste and lack of circumspection in conceiving what spirit is and how it moves could assign to it the origin of change. On the contrary, while spirit is extraordinarily mobile in its existence, it borrows this mobility from the hair-trigger organization and unstable equilibrium of its organs, and of the simulations which excite them incessantly. In its own nature, spirit arrests the flux of things, as best it may, in its intuitions, and turns it into a store of synthetic pictures and symbols, sensuous and intellectual. We may therefore say with more reason that the world imposes movement on a spirit which by its own genius would rather be addressed to the eternal than say that reality seems successive only to a flighty spirit turning distractedly the leaves of a book written in eternity. Matter, not spirit, is the seat and principle of the flux. Spirit, being an emanation of this flux, seems indeed a pilgrim wandering and almost lost in the wilderness of essence and in the dark treasure house of truth. But in respect to the realm of matter, spirit is like a child asking questions and making pause, and often brutally run over and crushed by a rush of changes which it cannot understand. So true is this that even the vistas of sentimental time, although the spirit creates them in its effort to dominate and synthesize the flux of things, yet trouble it a little and seem disquieting. To intense contemplation, memory and prophecy come forward and become present, and the present itself recedes into a wonderful unreality and becomes truth. Everything stands together like a thing accomplished. Prophets do not predict but see, and cry out, even if the vision be of the last day of creation, "Behold, the trump blew, and the heavens fell." Such pictorial prophecy, like pictorial memory, is a state of trance. It takes us out of changing time altogether, as it is the function of spirit to take us, either into the realm of truth, if the memories or prophecies are clairvoyant, or else into the realm of essence, if they are false fancies. Meantime, historical events, since they are conventional stretches containing variations, continually lose and continually gain existence, never being complete and comprehensive, as is the truth about them. They cannot be gathered up or understood, even by those who enact them, without being sublimated and congealed into their historical essences, and forfeiting their natural flux. The dramatic direction which they may retain in visionary memory, like the visible lack of symmetry in the file of halted soldiers or in the sculpted arrows, retain in visionary memory, like the visible lack of symmetry in the file of halted soldiers or in the sculpted arrows, suggests a movement to the observer only because it induces him to perform one in his survey. But the direction of this survey is reversible, like a film for the cinema. The asymmetrical forms themselves contain no precipitation. They do not destroy and traverse themselves or take one another's places. They are only a synthetic model or fossil of change. Modern philosophers, being contemptuous of essences and without a clear conception of them, usually assume the reality of change and succession without much scrutiny. They do not stop to inquire where and by what juxtaposition the quality abandoned yields to the quality acquired. If we venture to imagine what is probably in their minds, I think we shall come upon something like this: that the flux is composed of states of existence, mental, material, or simply qualitative, each of which is a unit and contains no variation. Yet they succeed and replace one another because they arise in an underlying pervasive medium, absolute time, which itself lapses inherently and inevitably at a uniform rate, so that all its moments are already dated and at a precise remove from one another. When states of mind or matter or neutral phenomena arise, they must therefore arise at one or another of these dated instants. Although each fact is an absolute reality of itself and with no intrinsic relevance to any other fact, yet any of them may be successive or simultaneous if they occur at identical or successive moments in that ever-flowing, irreversible time. This conception of a pure yet physical time in which events of any sort may arise and take their places needs only to be described and inspected for it to dissolve into puzzles. Each of its moments would be exactly like every other. Far from measuring a scale of duration, they would collapse into identity. I have already indicated the sensuous origin and specious character of this ghost. It is an after-image of the sensation of time. But let me now admit the hypothesis of such an intuitive phantom being substantial, and the prior locus of all existence. Events will now be rendered successive simply by their position in pure time, apart from any inner continuity or derivation of one from another. And the absolute date of each will be the sole character in it by virtue of which it may be pronounced the source or the result of any other. But absolute dates are intrinsically indiscernible and different only in that one is earlier and another later, so that concrete events will be arranged in sequence only by virtue of a character in them which is absolutely indistinguishable. Here, a subtler suggestion might be made by idealists. Succession, they might say, is a relation between the characters of events. As existences, all states of spirit, and for the idealist, no other existences are possible, are self-created, and, in status, eternal. They are fragments of the one universal mind, but each may be temporal in its deliverance or in the picture it unfolds. If we could compare these scattered spiritual acts, as the idealist is always doing, although on his principles it would be impossible, we should see correspondences, developments, and contradictions in their objects. A feature central in one view might be recognized as the same as a feature quite marginal and faint in another view. The pictured future there might be the living present here, and the pictured past here in some measure, the present there. Comparing and, as it were, matching these pictures by their rims, we might compose a tolerably continuous landscape, and by identifying the original states of spirit actually existing each for itself with those ideal elements which they supply to this panorama. Another illegitimate habit of idealists we might attribute to those existing states the dates of their objects as these reappear in our own synthesis. Thus we think to cast specious time like a butterfly net over spirits freely fluttering and dateless in themselves, which altogether escape it. They are not rendered successive by the fact that some of them may repeat the beginning and some the end of what in our survey seems a single story. It is imperative, then, if we wish to understand existence and the succession of its moments, to disregard any synthesis created in imagination between the essences of these moments, or between what are supposed to have been their essences. Actual succession is a substitution, not a perspective. Now, when this transcendental synthetic glance is discounted, are there other elements left in the experience of change which might serve to describe fitly the nature of a flux, actual and physical? Certainly there are such intuitions, else even the most tentative and modest approach to an understanding of nature would be denied to us. The feeling of persistence or sheer duration is such an intuition. This feeling is more complex than the insight into the eternity of a given essence, in which there is no drag. It is rather a sense of iteration or failure to lapse in something properly transitory, a strange and questionable arrest where movement is latent or imminent. Such a sense of persistence may become tedious, sublime, or excruciating. It includes an acute tension or sense of existence. It is therefore an admirable expression of the life of nature, emphasizing the continuity not without implying the variation. It marks the fact that the flux of existence, although it really never stops, often sustains certain recognizable forms, such as the psyche herself in a precarious being. The counterpart of continuity, interruption, has the same implication. Total catastrophes in nature might occur, but a wholly new world would not remember or suggest its previous non-existence. The great advance in understanding comes when intuition reveals change in some single respect within a constant object. Doubtless, in strictness, when the world changes in any particular, its total essence is renewed, since its balance becomes another, yet the new total essence is, and must be, if the world is to be consecutive, largely similar to the old one, and this not by a groundless accident or magic law, but because the matter of the earlier phase is inherited by the latter. This matter, which alone renders either phase a fact and not a mere essence, carries with it its quantity, its energy, and a progressive redistribution of its parts, so that the very principle of genesis in lending to each moment of the flux its physical existence determines the essence which it shall exemplify, and determines it in virtue of the continuity and heredity which must bind movements together materially if they are to be successive chronologically. The same material heritage also determines in what measure or in what detail each successive moment shall differ from the previous one, or how far it shall merely repeat it, and it renders the world throughout its moments somewhat amenable to addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If it is true that we cannot bathe twice in the same river, because the water has flowed on, it is true also that the same water which was formerly here is now farther down, so that we might bathe in it again if we only ran down the bank with greater celerity than the water. But our second plunge, though into the same water, would be at another point in the stream. It is this combination of continuity with instability that we indicate when we speak of a river or a flux. The dialectic of continuity, whether it may be analyzed into an infinite number of discrete points or into an indefinite number of intervals, was probably not considered by nature before she began to exist. There is therefore no need to consider it in describing existence. Continuity for the naturalist is merely a name for the fact that existence is a transmitted burden, something that goes on and is kept up. In the midst of death, we are in life. Destruction and change are never so complete at any moment as not to continue the previous reality. If each moment made a wholly fresh beginning, it would not be a moment in a flux, but simply one member in an original multitude of beings. Now, this hereditary nature of existence, each moment being genitum non factum, is rudely represented in intuition by any phenomenon which partly changes and partly seems to remain the same. Common sense hypostaticizes this intuition when it traces and recognizes persons and things supposed to remain identical in a maze of changing relations. And science only carries this inevitable hypostasis a step further when it conceives permanent atoms or permanent laws, sustaining the flux of things and keeping it continuous and intelligible. Such science is conscientious fiction. There are presumably no atoms and no laws separable from the concrete strains and movements of the flux, by which its substance is intimately modified. But this substance being hereditary, each of its moments assumes a form derived from the previous posture of things, and offering to observation innumerable repetitions, calculable changes, and familiar habits. Otherwise, neither life nor observation could ever have arisen in the midst of chaos to take note of its existence. Substance, with its intrinsic deployment and heredity, would certainly remain mysterious to us even if we could inspect it at close quarters, because it involves an unintelligible alloy added to whatever essences we might assign to it. As things stand, however, the mystery is darkened by the great difference in scale between the texture of matter and that of human ideas, and when in mathematics we pursue and almost seem to attain that in human reality, we find ourselves in possession of a perfect method of notation from which everything to be noted has disappeared. And the only truth of our most accurate science turns out to be practical and utterly blind. We must revert in order to recover our sanity and the subject matter of our natural science, to crude experience and to the common arts. And here everything is on the human scale, sunset and sunrise, the obvious repetitions in the generations of men and animals, and in their stock passions, high movements which in nature are probably knit unbrokenly together, and never quite alike, or obedient to any disembodied law. Seen on the human scale, repetitions are perfectly inexplicable. They suggest to the gaping mind a magical control of events by a monotonous destiny. They suggest superstition. But beneath these trite measures which human wit casts over things, like a net of proverbs, the natural flux goes its own pace, uncontrolled by any magic or logic. It is natural. It passes everywhere from what it was at that point, as the conjunction of elements there prompts it to do, never asking whether that conjunction is new or habitual. It knows no desire for novelty, no obsession by rule. It is as willing to run into repetitions as into catastrophes, and it is as likely to suggest to gross observation a law in one place as a purpose in another. Its order in one place may produce a mind to which its general order seems a chaos. Physical time is another name for this native instability of matter, which, since it has distinct stations or phases, may be observed by spirit, and since it falls into recurring rhythms, may be measured by its own stride. These stages and rhythms are essences. and it is in terms of essence that any possible physics is condemned to describe nature. But the description becomes true insofar as these or equivalent essences are actually embodied in the field of action. It is only by such embodiment in matter that essences can be loosened, as it were, from their essential setting and turned into the characters of facts. Or rather, since their essential setting is eternal and holds them even while embodiments of them are passing through existence, it is only by being distributed in the field of action that essences can add for a moment external and variable relations to those which their proper nature involves. This descent or incarnation of essences cannot be their own doing, since all essences are inert and non-existent. Even in a dream, the objects that impose themselves successfully on the spirit, being purely imaginary, have no power to maintain themselves or to generate one another, any more than one word or note in the air has the power, in the absence of a vocal instrument, to breathe the next word or the next note. It is the slumbering material psyche that generates those feelings and images out of her disquiet, as when awake she generates those words or notes out of her material exuberance. Were it not for her stored troubles, no insane anxieties or absurd vicissitudes would disturb her sleep. Even the thinnest creations of spirit, therefore, are products of the realm of matter, and possible only within it. Incarnation is no voluntary emanation from above. It is a dire event, a budding torment, here below. A world of accidents, arbitrary and treacherous, first lends to the eternal a temporal existence and a place in the flux. Particularity and transition are inherent in this nether form of being. Everything that arises is liable to lapse. Everything that exists by conjunction with other things on its own plane. It belongs somewhere and to a certain time by virtue of the external relations which pin in there. From this, an important consequence follows. Existence can have no general or stable medium deeper than itself, such as an absolute space or time through which it should flow, and which, in some respects, would control its formation. The flux is itself absolute and the seat of existence. The substance which flows through things cannot exist between them. It bestows on them their hereditary qualities and quantities, and their place in nature. Without substance, each phenomenon would be an insulated essence, lacking all force or movement, either internal or transcendent, and incapable of existing in itself or of imposing itself at any particular moment on any particular mind. But the counterpart is no less true. Without those exchangeable forms, without running through those distinct states and positions, substance in turn would fade into an essence. Far from being the natural parent of all scattered particular facts, it would be the impotent possibility of their forms only. It would not be that pregnant and laboring matter which fills the world, but the essence at the opposite end of the ontological scale, pure being, in which all essences are indeed contained, as it were, in solution, but in which none is suffered to come forward with an irrational emphasis and impudently to exist. In order to exist, substance itself must be something in particular, exclusive at each point of what it is at all others. Having no prior conditions, existence at each node or center is what it happens to be. Having no prior conditions, existence at each node or center is what it happens to be, showing such a form, energy, intensity, or consciousness as it happens to show. We must consider and inspect each part separately, by transporting ourselves into it at least ideally, before we can say what that part is intrinsically, or how many parts there are, or what is their order. Relations the facts must indeed have, if they are many. First, the relations eternally contrasting their several essences, and secondly, those accidental and variable relations which render these facts existing instances of their essences, and parts of one fluid world. All the axioms of philosophers declaring the world to be necessarily infinite or everlasting or rational or conscious must be received as applying only to their respective systems. The world, meantime, is just what it is, has been what it has been, and will be what it will be. Yet, while the character of each fact is self-declared, its place among other facts, such as our belief in it, depends on contacts and transitions between it and the rest of its world. Did it not come from something different, and did it not empty itself into something else, it would not contain within itself that stress, that incompleteness, that pervasive mortality, which precisely mark it as actual and living, and both more and less than a pure essence. If each moment of existence is a center and self-assertive, it is so by being a focus of rays gathered into it from external sources and discharged again into eventual effects. By virtue of these connections and transmissions, its place is fixed in the flux, and it vindicates its right to be called existent, since it is discoverable, measurable, and dated. All that it possesses besides its intrinsic essence, its originality, its feeling, if it has feeling, is hidden from the world, escapes physics altogether, and merely marks its degrees of inspiration. How much of the eternal it has managed, in passing, to draw it down into itself, to illustrate or to discover. How express in human language all the terms of which, unless they are proper names, designate essences? This mixture of self-assertion and instability proper to any moment of existence. The classic expedient is to analyze existence into matter and form, the matter being transmissible and serving to connect moment with moment and to render the latter the offspring of the earlier, while the form serves to characterize each moment and to give it individuality and limits. This is correct and, as might be seen by reviewing the alternatives, an inevitable way of expressing the nature of change in rhetorical terms. To the senses, to the passions, to the defining intellect, the flux of existence is indeed a flight of eternal essences across a permanent screen, in which alone they have their momentary existence. A screen which sometimes seems to be the vague universe, and sometimes one's own soul. Yet these categories, being logical or poetical, are not important to the naturalist. No doubt the naturalist too may speak of forms and of matter, but his forms are aggregates, themselves arising and breaking up, and his matter is something existent, the matter actually transmitted and transmuted by nutrition, generation, or labor. This matter everywhere has a particular quality, structure, and potency, and it not only possesses form as a geometrical solid possesses it, but it is informed with the peculiar essence of existence also, which includes inner instability, for it is by its place, size, energy, and growth, by material composition, qualities all involving external and variable relations, that a geometrical body existing differs from a geometrical solid defined. Aristotle himself derived the existence of any particular thing or substance not from its metaphysical components, but from prior complete natural beings, and he even assigned to this ancestral matter what seems to us too fixed a form, since he did not admit any evolution of species. Even if by chance he had been right in respect to the natural history of earthly animals, the same matter in other cycles or in morphology, the matter which by taking a particular form becomes a particular thing need never have worn that form before and may never wear it again. Its career is open towards the infinite, though at each moment it must be something specific, that if we consider its unknown plastic stress and the incalculable accidents to which it may be subject, we shall hardly be able to hold it down to any other enduring characters than those involved in its distinctive function, which is to lend existence to certain essences in a certain order and enable them to succeed and to confront one another in a competitive world. How penetrate into the inner flow of this existence? Sensuous, dialectical, or moral views of it, however legitimate, are necessarily summary, superficial, and poetical, being created by a psyche biased and synthetic in her reactions. Mathematical views are more impartial, but wretchedly abstract. Thus, for instance, number is just a category to apply to the field of action, since its elements move as units, but it is a miserable essence to substitute for them. Accurate science has this defect, that it seems to describe the distribution of units of nothing, and to record averages and movements that elude sense, and yet are conceived and posited only in reference to pictorial objects. Meantime, existence is no spectacle, though spectacles and calculations may amuse or describe it. In ourselves and in the objects on our own plane encountered in action, existence is a strain and an incubus, particular, self-centered, substantial. It is in terms of such existence, unstable but burdened and concrete, that an unsophisticated natural philosophy might conceive the realm of matter. If there is to be lapse, the flux at each point must possess an essence from which it lapses. These points, which are the terms of any possible change, I will call natural moments. By natural moments, I do not mean instants or cross-sections of the whole flux, where everything is supposed simultaneous. I mean rather any concrete but ultimate elements in the web of existence, within which there is no change or variation of essence, yet which are not merely their essences, but events exemplifying those essences, facts generated and dated in a general flux that outruns them on every side. Within each natural moment there can be no temporal divisions or scale. If a duration is assigned to it at all distinguishable from its intrinsic being, it must be assigned by virtue of some external measure or scale, drawn from an alien medium or perspective in which the moment is supposed to be embedded. In its own person, a natural moment may be called lasting or instantaneous with equal propriety, for its quality is unchangeable, and any variation would simply divide it into several natural moments. It contains no temporal diversity by which it could be collated with different points in a dated scale of time. On the other hand, this undivided moment has material continuity with other moments which generate it and which it generates, so that its life is but one incident, an indivisible beat between states of existence which are not itself yet are its closest kin. In what does this kinship consist? Not merely in similarity, though some similarity, perhaps only quantitative, is doubtless involved in derivation. A natural moment may be followed by a catastrophe and by chaos, nor is derivation mere juxtaposition, since we have seen that there is no prior medium in which this juxtaposition could occur. There must then be something in the inner nature of one natural moment that renders it the derivative from another natural moment, therefore called its source, and productive of a third natural moment, which we therefore call its effect. Every natural moment is both traditional and propulsive. It has a beginning and an end, a head and a tail, the head turned towards the end, and the tail towards the beginning. These need not be distinct members within its body. They may be distinguished like up and down only by virtue of contrary contacts and tensions. For a natural moment, bears quite opposite relations to its source and food on the other side, and to its effects or relics on the other. Many rays, as it were, are focused in each explosion, and the spark dies by diffusion or excretion of the substance which lent it spasmodic being. Its essence is like that of a valve. It contains a reference to the direction in which matter may flow through it. The moment exists only in act, when the valve is a valve in function, and at that crisis it yields to pressure coming from one side only, while it opens out and empties itself only towards the other side. Or we might liken it to a hyphen or to the sign plus, essentially transitional, as it is existentially transitory. By essence, it overlooks its neighbors on either hand without trespassing on their ground. That a thing by its internal being should have reference to something external, a fact which, in the case of knowledge, gives so much trouble to logicians, is so far from being an anomaly or an exception that it is the indispensable condition of existing at all, because apart from that transcendent tension or inherent instability, a natural moment would be simply its essence, not the act of reaching and dropping that essence, as it must be if it exists or takes place in nature. I do not think that analytically transition can be otherwise expressed than as a transformation of one thing into another, involving two natural moments, and leaving the bond between them obscure. But it is not analytically that transition may be understood. It is lost when its terms are divided. And yet it is no synthesis of these terms, but a generation, whatever that may be, of one term out of the other. Within each term, however, we may expect to find a synthetic symbol and counterpart of transition. Let me call it the forward tension of the natural moment. This name is not meant to attribute to the elements of the flux any conscious effort or expectancy. They are restless without the feeling of unrest. Yet the analogy implied in the metaphor must be a real analogy, since effort and expectancy are creatures and expressions of this very tension in the flux of matter, when it takes the form of a psyche. Forward tension, then, will designate fairly enough whatsoever corresponds within a natural moment to the external fact that it occurs between two others, one of which an observer would call its antecedent. Such a synthetic burden, native to existence in its every node or concretion, may well be represented in physics by a quantum of potential energy, determined by some formula or equation, and we know that the ignorant psyche creates many a poetic index to this same burden in herself when she conceives sentimental time, and all the dramatic perspectives that people the imagination. For it is only by virtue of the tensions concentrated within her own organism, her memory, will, and intelligence, that the psyche is able to paint a world, which she thinks real, on the canvas of intuition. That the natural moment as a forward tension becomes the more plausible, or even certain, when we consider that what we are describing elements of existence, not mathematical or dialectical patterns which analysis might discover there, and that the field of existence is simply the field of action, for there is no doubt that an action of forward tension is inherent, nor is it the agent only that has this movement. We have found that his partner in action, the brother world on which he acts, must have it too, if they are to play the same game and contribute to the same sequel. We may therefore confidently attribute the forward tension proper to our life to all the rest of nature, down to its primary elements, without attributing to those elements, or to that total, any specifically human quality. On the contrary, that forward tension in us is precisely what we share with all matter, and what renders matter our great companion. For the realms of essence and of truth, to which the spirit looks when it suspends action, are not so much our companions or enemies in this world as our celestial monitors. Their perpetual presence does not beset us here, but, if we notice it, transports us there. We may therefore appeal to our experience of action on the human scale to suggest to us the nature of action even in the heart of matter, which a mere diminution of mathematical scale or use of the microscope may never reach. Now, on the human scale, the most obvious units in action are men, and their forward tension is dramatically called their will. A man's body, if we study it analytically, is enormously complex, and his will highly conditioned and insecure, so that he thinks it free. But if we take him and his will in the flush of action as factors in the moral world, they count as units. Each personage in history, each passion or interest in a man's life may be called a conventional moment. Considered dramatically, each is a single phase of existence internally constant, through which existence is precipitated into its next phase. How these conventional moments begin, how they end, how matter flows through them, and what determines their inner character while they last are all matters of common knowledge. We call them birth, death, food, and influence. It is on this analogy that natural moments should be conceived, if we wish to avoid the extravagances of pure theory usurping the place of fact. A man with the forward tension of all his instincts and passions notoriously springs from a seed, and he develops from the heart of that seed, internally, as it transforms and organizes the food which comes to it and which it selects. Seed and food, these are the conditions a parte priori of a man's existence. A seed to transmit the center of organization and impose a specific hereditary form, and food to supply suitable matter to pass through that form and sustain it in existence. So this conventional moment, this individual life, begins and is established, and how does it end? By dissolution, when that hereditary formative energy is exhausted or crushed by accident, and the matter which it had organized about its center is dispersed. This matter will take other forms, some of them living. It may breed worms, as the Christian imagination was fond of repeating, but a corpse is not a seed. It is not from there that the next generation is derived. Their seed must be plucked from the secret heart of the man in his maturity, essentially uncontrolled and uncontaminated by his personal fortunes. There is a vast difference in character between the beginning and the end. The source is single, concentrated, specific, loaded with precise potentialities. The effects and consequences are diffused, peripheral, miscellaneous, unending. Except the seed of his children, all that a man sheds during his life and at his death is, from the vital point of view, corruption. All that he draws in so far as it feeds his flame, is purity and life. He is a pulsation or distally of his hereditary nature, a bubble waxing till it bursts. Existence, then, is a passage from potentiality to act, the order of its moments being determined by the direction of realization within each of them. Before and after are not relations in a pure time, but organic, like up and down or right and left. They presuppose a center, a focus into which matter flows and from which it is dispersed. And this concretion, like a spark or a blow, is irreversible, and separates its occasion and materials on the one hand, in which it was potential, from its effects, and remains, on the other, in which its potentiality is that of other things. Thus, existence is not simply a series of essences solidified, nor a juxtaposition of phenomena. It is the career of a hereditary substance. It is the life of matter. And this in both senses of the word life. For it is the history of the fortunes of that plastic enduring being, and it is also the forward tension intrinsic to each moment of that career, an inner tension which is sometimes raised to consciousness and turns to spiritual light, but which animates matter everywhere and renders it transitional. Matter, as if ashamed at the irrationality of having one form rather than another, hastens to exchange it, whatever it may be, for some other form, and this haste is its whole reality, for it can add nothing to the essences which it successively exemplifies except just this, that they are enabled to be exemplified in succession, to be picked up and abandoned. Matter is the invisible wind which, sweeping for no reason over the field of essences, raises some of them into a cloud of dust, and that whirlwind we call existence. Potentiality seems a vain word, and deceptive, yet it indicates a fact in the realm of truth. since seeds are capable of development into certain organisms only, and these cannot spring from any other source. Yet what this potentiality may be actually is usually unknown to us. We merely assume that it must be something actual, since the state of the seed at any one time must exemplify some individual essence, however complex it may be. Not that this actual state of the potential would pass into the further state, potential in it, if the potential were merely an essence or a pure phenomenon. An essence or a pure phenomenon has no fertility, no implications. It will remain forever just what it is. It is matter, impatient of form, that fills form with a forward tension and realizes one essence after another. And this tension in matter is ultimately expressed and rendered conscious in spirit, so that spirit is normally filled with craving, fear, curiosity, and jealousy, clasping to its bosom something precious and unintelligible, only too apt to slip away. The relation between a man and his father, and that between his son and himself, considered in its essence, is identical in the two instances, and always bilateral. There cannot be a child without a parent, nor a parent without a child. Yet the flux runs only one way, and from the point of view of each person, the felt tensions in the two instances are unilateral, different, and opposite. Even if by miracle grandfather and grandson were identical in essence, as in Greece they often bore the same name, they would be separated and posited as distinct persons by their opposite unilateral relation to the man between, who is son only to the one, and father only to the other. By these contrasting offices and sentiments, each generation synthesizes the flux of life in its own feeling and action at every moment. We may reasonably regard this double tension as representing, on the human scale, the irreversible polarity within every natural moment, which indicates and transmits the irreversible direction of Genesis. Nor is this universal flux composed of a single strand, like a thin autobiographical melody, sounding only one note at a time. It is many-voiced, like the Sea of Homer. We may indeed divide it ideally into instants, each of which cuts through the whole stream and shows its complex visceral face at that juncture. But such a cross-section is not a natural moment. A natural moment is a realized essence of any sort, so long as its realization continues, and there may be many collateral natural moments. Moments will be collateral if, when traced backwards or forwards according to their inward tensions, they terminate in identical ulterior moments, and this without being strictly simultaneous throughout the interval, nor divisible on the same scale. So streams that flow from the same lake and empty into the same estuary need not be identical or equal or parallel, but must be collateral. Scientific speculation now seems to authorize this view, even for the purposes of calculation, which I should not have expected, but a skeptic will readily admit that the more the sciences deepen their view and discount their assumptions, the more they will familiarize us with differences of pace in nature and incommensurable meanderings, yet not meanderings beyond the field of action into a metaphysical region. For unless all these scales and dimensions impinge upon facts posited and acted upon by animal faith, their interesting variety will belong only to the realm of essence, and will not describe this world. This world is not easily probed or understood. Existence is nothing if not complex, elastic, fundamentally chaotic. Perception, description, and dogma oversimplify and overregulate everything. All lateral tensions might be typified, for a living being, in the horrid simultaneity of eating and being eaten. Microbes devour no less efficaciously than wild beasts, and this perpetual inner waste, met by the need of replenishment, is the clearest of demonstrations that matter is the principle of existence. Matter is essentially food, an object of competition, and a substance fit for assimilation. It is forever withdrawing itself from one form and assuming another, or being redigested. Food is substance in circulation, shuffling its unities like figures in a dance, and the same generative transition that originally establishes a particular moment of existence is required to maintain and renew it. Otherwise, that essence is lost. Every living thing must feed perpetually, or it dissolves. If, then, we may transfer these fundamental characters of conventional moments to natural moments, we may say that a natural moment arises and exists only by virtue of external supports. First, a parent moment to launch it and determine its initial character, and then collateral moments to control that heritage and determine what and how long it shall be in act. If ever existence is sustained at all in what we call the same object or person or thought, this happens by an external equilibrium which keeps that thing in a state of suspense or of continual self-recovery, each of its external relations tending to transform it, yet all of them together, for the nonce, keeping it as it was. A seed, if it could be thoroughly inspected by a clairvoyant spirit, would reveal the essence which contains or prepares its pregnancy, according to the method of development prevalent in nature, or in that species. But the actual essence of the seed, or of its ultimate fruit, is nothing to the naturalist, for he knows that no seed will mature except under certain fostering external conditions, and to these conditions, not to the unknown essence of the seed, he will trace and attribute the issue. The seed itself could never have been formed, or, as it were, expelled from the parent moment, without the food and warmth of a fostering world, and in the act of birth or existence, for these are one in a natural moment. The sequel will be determined and sustained by the lateral tensions which beset it, allowing that sequel and forbidding any other. Everything, then, seems to be a mechanism of circumstances, of which the essences realized at distinct moments are, for the naturalist, only idle signs. What seems to follow? That the forward tension which I have been attributing to natural moments may be simply the act of escaping in the direction of least resistance, as matter always will. The mysterious potentiality packed in the seed would then not be internal to it, or due to a specially wonderful essence therein embodied. It would be the concentration there of many external relations that work together, a resultant of all the cosmic tensions to which that point was subject. In itself, the seed or the moment would not then need to possess any specific character. It might have only a simple or neutral essence, such perhaps as the pure being which filled the atoms of Democritus. Yet without manifesting any particular bias, it might be ready, as far as its quantity availed, to run and nourish any vortex then evolving, or any self-asserting form. This it would do or not do, according to circumstances, so that all the tensions and heritages of animal life would be but incidents in a universal mechanism. A diviner like Democritus, or like a modern mathematician, hypostaticizing his notation into the substance of the world, may be willing to prophesy that such is the actual constitution of the universe. Such it may be indeed, at some inhuman depth, and I am willing to admit any such hypothesis on the authority of the learned, because that seems to me to be the direction in which the truth must lie, even if I distrust the means by which those wise men think that they have discovered it. Yet, however perfectly such a system might transcribe the flux of existence, it would not be that flux in person, or in its elapsing life. And science cannot well be truer of it, though true at a deeper level, that are all the vulgar essences which visibly give it character. Somehow the flux has actually gathered and distilled itself into many-colored natural moments, as into drops, and these are the first and fundamental measures by which we may measure it, and the centers from which we must survey it. Perhaps in a chaos, the only forward tension might be that of the universe as a whole, distended and convulsed by all its lateral tensions indiscriminately. Chaos, however, though doubtless fundamental, is not now complete. If it were, it would not be observable for lack of observers, and we, so long as we behold a world, however chaotic, have the assurance that the flux, for the time being, has been somewhat canalized in our parts of the universe, and that lateral tensions are partly held in check and turned to sustenance for the benefit of some persisting organisms. And the forward tensions of these, with their variations and fulfillments, form the drama of natural history. Moreover, if we may say that in the world at large, lateral tensions determine the existence and the forward tension of every part, we may also say, vice versa, that the forward tensions of the parts, taken together and meeting, compose the lateral tensions at work at that time. And this way of speaking has some advantages. It recognizes that material existence, though everywhere conditioned externally, is everywhere spontaneous. Neither its being nor its singular forward tension are in the least questionable or unwelcome to any innocent moment. It takes itself for granted and leaps, if it can, to the full expansion of its inner powers. That act, or that attempt, is its very existence. Once existing, the moment unhesitatingly exercises its native force in its innate direction, and acts no less freely and efficaciously than it is acted upon. In a contingent world, necessity is a conspiracy of accidents. This precipitation of accidents is the work of matter, shifting its equilibrium and modifying its strains. A flux could neither change nor continue if it were immaterial. Its successive forms, since it takes them up and drops them, are not essences without substance, nor fact without derivation. A natural moment marks the existential emergence of a new form, that particular form which circumstances then impose on the matter at hand as previously disposed. And this moment ends when the balance of tensions which brought it about yields to a fresh equilibrium. This limit of any moment is and is called an end, as that other limit is and is called the beginning. For here there is a concretion and there release. The forms are eternal, matter is old, yet the interplay of the two is full of novelty, and each point takes a somewhat unprecedented direction. For it is not the old form that creates the new. The old form, if it could do anything, would simply preserve itself, but it is indomitable matter from the beginning in unstable equilibrium that fell once into the old form as it falls now into the new, spontaneously and without vows of fidelity. Its potentiality, though unborn, is always specific, since it is involved in the distribution and tensions of the actual matter already in play. Its realization is the flux of existence, creating succession and telling the beats of time. The dominance of matter in every existing being, even when that being is spiritual, is the great axiom of materialism, to which this whole book is only corollary. But this axiom would not be consonant with the life of nature if it did not involve a complementary truth which takes away all its partisan bias and half its inhuman sting. I mean, the complementary truth that matter is no model devised by the human imagination, like Egyptian atoms or the laws of physics, but is a primeval plastic substance of unknown potentiality, perpetually taking on new forms. The gist of materialism being that these forms are all pervasive and precarious, while the plastic stress of matter is alone creative and, as far as we can surmise, indestructible.